Hello and welcome to another exercise in watercolour, this time at West Beach Boatyard in Gelong. We're working from a monochrome photograph that I took some time ago, which we'll translate into a sketch showing our areas of light and dark and mid-tones, which we will need for the impact of the painting a little later on. I believe it's always wise to make that tonal sketch, whatever you do, whatever your subject is, before you make a start. The area we're looking at now, we're just a little bit of background sky area, nothing too prominent, a little bit of ultramarine blue, perhaps a tiny little bit of rubbish that's left on the palette underneath. I don't want the background to be terribly strong. These areas here that we're putting in, there'll be a suggestion of foliage and so on, which is around the back of this shed and so on. But it doesn't want to be too strong or creating too much of an impact. It's really only there for support purposes. So consequently, there's no specific painting of foliage or trees or shrubs or whatever. I'm mainly just using this as a nondescript backdrop to bring the main area of interest out a little bit. Hopefully that'll happen later in the painting. I don't carry any green on my palette. If I'm going to do something, I like to try and mix what I'm after. Here I'm just after something which is a little bit darker. Bringing the shaded areas, the foliage down closer towards the ground, where the light doesn't protrude quite as much. It's always as well to remember that no matter what wash you're going to put on over the top of a wet wash, it's going to be influenced by what's underneath it. So I can darken that green, those green areas and so on, by putting in a greyish wash over the top of it, and I will still get the influence of the green coming through it. A little bit of raw sienna, a bit of Naples yellow, just indicating the lighter areas of the shed. Again, I'm cutting around the main characters that I've put in here, and the struts and posts and poles and things like that, which are in every boatyard when a boat's out of the water like this. I prefer to cut around these areas rather than put a blanket wash over the whole thing and then come along later on with a solid body colour to indicate these various parts of the composition. I think this is a good practice for brush skill, rather than rely just heavily on either gouache or body colour to pick out the bits that you might have missed or might have painted over. Here we're just using a grey, ultramarine blue, with a little bit of burnt sienna, just for the paving areas and some of the on the tarpaulin here and so on, just an underwash. The brush I'm using is a small squirrel hair mop. Carries quite a bit of liquid, also got a reasonably good point to it to help me out in some of the areas that need a bit of drawing. dark underwash here in the areas of the below the waterline of the boat. This will ultimately be a very dark reddish sort of a colour and so on. Most of the lower parts of these boats are painted in a darker colour of sorts, reds and blues and things. I prefer red ones and so on. Not for any other reason than it gives the painting a little bit of life where necessary. Brush I'm using now is an Escoda Perla 20 synthetic brush. It's one of my favourites. You can do pretty well anything with it and knock it around like, and it will still come back for more. Points up beautifully, which is one of the essentials of a good watercolour brush. This area will grey off considerably as it's drying, and we'll reinforce it later on. The area underneath the boat, generally speaking, is usually covered in posts and poles and boxes and empty cans of paint and all sorts of other stuff and so on. So they're generally a bit of a rubbish tip underneath the boat. So I'm not looking to make any form of definition or detail in that area. It's purely a suggestion of a lot of the accumulated rubbish that happens when boat owners are working on craft out of the water. Boat owners are not, as a general rule, known to be terribly neat. See that in the composition of the area that we're talking about here, I left the car, which was, you can see in the initial photograph, taken that out, and I've substituted it with a couple of people here that are contemplating as to what their next move is going to be in the repair or repaint or whatever it is they're going to do to this boat. I find that the injection of people in your painting, and I always recommend that, always gives a little bit of a human touch, obviously, for your composition, but also helps with the scale of the painting. Makes it a little bit more interesting. The story that you're trying to tell tends to work a bit better with some people in it. I'm not using a lot of darker colours and so on, but those that I do use generally come from ultramarine blue and a bit of neutral tint, burnt sienna. That's a grey that I use commonly. I think I probably use ultramarine blue more than any other colour on the palette. As the base for a lot of the things that I do. A bit of manganese blue with a bit of burnt sienna for the shadows. We'll probably have to come back and reinforce these a bit later on, but they will tend to dry a little bit and fade as part of that process. I like to work all around the painting, picking up bits and pieces here and there of whatever I've got on the brush, looking for some of the darker areas and some of the shadows. Rather than concentrate on one part of the painting, and get that completed, and then move on to something else. I find that doesn't work terribly well for me. Just a smaller version of the Skoda brush here, and so on. This is about a 4. Lovely brushes. All handmade, all synthetic. I don't think I own a staple brush, and I find that these are more than adequate for my skill level, and they tend to be very responsive to the sort of things that I want them to do. A little boatyard scene is coming to life. A little bit of drying time here. One of the things that I think is worth reminding any potential artist or any artist who paints for his own pleasure and so on, it's probably concentrate for as much as possible on the things that you know. If you have other interests outside painting and so on, concentrate on making those into your painting exercises and so on, and you'll find that you're a lot more comfortable with the painting if you're working in familiar areas. Back to our rubbish dump underneath the boat at this point, now with a bit of dark, a bit of probably neutral tint, a bit of burnt sienna. Try to give our characters, and we introduce them into the painting, a little bit of something to do. What I like about boatyard scenes and so on are these props and supports and things left lying around and so on at various angles, and they help contain the interest within the confines of the painting, almost without you thinking too much about it. Hopefully some of these angles and so on, the prop supports are done so that the eye is directed back into the painting rather than any excuse to leave the area. We'll bring a little bit of colour into these two workmen over here in a little while, just to support their image a bit. Dried a bit, and some of these darker areas have faded off trifle, so we will reinforce them. Again, I stress that there's no detail in all this nonsense underneath the boat. It's not intended to be that way. It's just purely different shapes, different angles, and so on to create a bit of interest. This is a very popular area for painters in the Gelong area and so on, because there's always something going on. Lots and lots of boats and lots of very interesting shapes, some new boats, some old boats, and so on, but they all create terrific sources of subject matter. The area below the waterline view, which I've got in a little bit of alizarin crimson, but mainly naphtol red. Remove a little bit of that with a damp brush, just to reinforce a bit of form. Here we've got some neutral tint again, just to reinforce these darker areas and so on. Just keep these darks nice and strong. I don't use black at all. Neutral tint is probably about the closest that I get to that. And I don't really think black is necessary in the majority of cases. Contrast is what we're trying to achieve. So we've given our men a little bit of colour on the shirts and so on, and now just working towards a few smaller details in a bit of white gouache here and there. We're going to introduce a fence along the front of this, which is, you can see in the photograph, just open wire, and we use the outside shapes of the fence to help the lines of perspective in the composition. Now, I'm not going to put every strand of wire in the fence, of course, but we will put a few in for suggestion, and that's all that's required. It's just purely suggestion, nothing more. We don't have to make a statement about that this is a fence. Hopefully the suggestion will be sufficient. A little bit of cross hatching here and there will have the desired effect. We're getting towards the end of it all now, and I've got to resist the urge to fiddle with it too much. Just a few bits and pieces here and there. Tiny little bit of shadow. Again, just to reinforce some of these, a little bit of accents on the fence, just to help out, so we're not relying just on a stark white line. So this is a time of your painting where it's got to tell yourself not to fiddle around with it and chase little bits and pieces all over the place. You've got to be happy with what you do, and I think we've gotten to the end of our exercise, and I hope you enjoy doing it. It was enjoyable making for you. Bye now.